Welcome to the Heat of Command podcast, Mastering the Art of Fire Service Leadership,
where we, your hosts, aim to teach you how to use introspection and self-reflection to be your most authentic, genuine self, leader, and human being.
And now, here are your hosts. This is Kyle Matusik.
And Carrie Henderson. Thanks for joining. Hey, listeners. We're excited to be back for another episode of the Heat of Command podcast. We are kind of still recovering from our big week last week. We were at the Virginia Fire Rescue Conference in Virginia Beach, and we spoke 3 times and recorded our longest podcast yet in the middle of the exhibit hall with some amazing interviews. Such a great time. The classes were so much fun, and I think we're both still pretty tired from that. I know I am. I'm sleepy.
Yeah, it was a great week, and then it's the harsh reality for me of coming back home. I always enjoy coming to Virginia. I know it's only been 2 years, and every time I fly in, it's just so reminiscent of 20 years ago flying in there when I was in the Coast Guard, and it's just like brings back a lot of my past, which is interesting. And it's very cool for me to be there and learning from so many people, and just the forward thinking and progress that I feel Virginia is ahead of the game in a lot of areas, at least what I've experienced there, and getting to talk to some people and learn more. It's a motivating environment. So yeah, it was great.
Yeah, it was really wonderful, the conversations we got to have, and hearing from Chief Vance Cooper about where the VFCA, Virginia Fire Chiefs Association, is going and what they're doing in the legislature. It was just wonderful to hear what they're pushing to get more money for training and for personnel, and the justification behind all of that. I really enjoyed hearing all of that. It helps, I think, for every level in the fire service, firefighter through every rank, to know what goes on behind the scenes, because there's a lot of frustration in the firehouses. There's a lot of frustration in every industry right now about how expensive things are and how hard it is to find folks to fill positions. So to hear the work that's being done is refreshing, and it's like, okay, they're doing the work. We just got to be patient.
Yeah, and it's I'm not too involved on the political side of stuff that goes on here in Illinois, but the interesting part for me to see is, in Virginia, you don't have that extra layer of kind of bureaucracy that we have to deal with here with the unions, So it's, yes, we still have all these same problems, and then there's union and management issues on top of all of that. So it's just like another layer of stuff that we got to fish through and get through and overcome all these challenges on, regardless of which side you're on, it's a lot. It's a lot for an industry and organization such as the fire service.
Yeah. And something else, so to get this episode kind of rolling with what we want to talk about today, we had some great conversations in our classes about values, and kind of took it to a different level, and some different perspectives on values at an individual level, and then values at a department level. And I think we had really good talks about that. And this is a great time to really dig deep in an episode just about values. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, and to kind of marry that or couple it with setting your individual values and how to set department values that mean something. And we talk a lot about authenticity. And I think your department values have to be authentic and real for your culture and your department, for people to understand where they're coming from, and for people to be able to meet them and want to live up to them, if that makes any sense. So this episode, we'll talk about personal values, and then talk a little bit, or maybe a lot of it, about department values, how to set them, and when to reevaluate them, because that was the question that came up in our Women of Fire Day. Was we talked about my department setting values and the awesome experience that came from that. And someone in class, actually, I think it was Chief Marcy Stone who asked the question, right? Or no, it was Sam. It was Chief Green asked the question, like, when do you reevaluate those as a department? So let's get into that too today. So values. My experience with setting values, and I've said this before, it's kind of funny, is I went to the Virginia Fire Officers Academy right before I got promoted to captain. And they were like, "Oh, we're gonna set our values." And I was like, "What?" And I always say that, make that sound because it felt so cliche. So fire departments for many, many years and businesses, you got into this habit or not habit, it was expected. You set mission, vision, and values. But I think some industry and some fire departments did it just to say they did it. And it didn't feel real. It felt cheap and it felt cheesy. It didn't feel like it meant something or it was realistic to the department. And so when you read some of those, I go, no, that's not your department at all. And so when we did that in the Virginia Fire Officers Academy, I was a little put off by it at first. And I thought, well, surely I know my own personal values. Everybody knows their values, their integrity and their honesty and blah, blah, blah. Where I had not actually done the exercise that they had us do, which is very, very simple. And we've talked about it before on here, I believe, about just a list of values, and they're on the internet, and going through them, crossing off the ones that don't mean anything to you or that don't really have like a gut wrenching or soul impacting feeling, and then circling the ones as you go through the list that give you an emotion that you're drawn to, or that you would like to work towards, because I think there's a crossover between values that are kind of instinctually your values for some reason and goals, because I think you could set a value that's also a goal. So I listen to the Rachel Hollis podcast all the time. I don't know if you know. Do you know who Rachel Hollis is, Kyle?
I do not.
Okay, so she speaks to most, I think her audience is probably mostly women, but she does like personal development speaking, and she writes books, Girl Wash Your Face, Girl Stop Apologizing, and she has a podcast. And she was talking about values in one of her episodes, and she sets a yearly like value word, and her word one year was growth. So it was kind of like a cross between a value and a goal for the year. She wanted growth. And she always says, be careful when you set those because the universe will meet you there. So she set growth as her word. And then all of a sudden, the universe was like, okay, you want to grow? I'm going to give you a lot of hard stuff. And that's going to force you to grow. So I think there's this crossover between, instinctual values and stuff that means a lot to you, and then values that maybe are a goal, if that makes any sense. So go through this list, and then you start to circle ones that mean something to you, that kind of give you this reaction. Like if someone were to cross that value. So if your value was honesty and someone were to be dishonest, when you're looking at that value word, and you think, okay, if someone was dishonest to me, oh, that would break my heart. Okay, that's probably a value for you. Circle that. Or when you're looking at that list and you go, I've had an experience where this value was questioned, or I've had an experience where this came into play and it helped me, make a decision. So like for me, grace, when I see the word grace, and the part of that, is obviously from my religion, but it's also how I want to be treated. I want to be given a whole lot of grace because we all screw up all the time. That's how humanity is. And that's how I treat other people. So my leadership style is by a lot of grace. And so that means a lot to me. So I circle that. So um it's an easy exercise, but I don't think a lot of people have ever done it, or done, really picked their values and reevaluated their values. So that is something I encourage everyone to do from at any point in your life, not just leaders, not just newly promoted, not just whoever, from firefighter to high school student to whoever. Learn what your values are and reevaluate them. So I don't know. What do you think, Kyle, about when is a good time we talk about values all the time, so I feel like I'm always evaluating mine. But when's a good time for somebody to start looking at reevaluating them?
I think it's a constant, right? I think it's something that you constantly have to be evaluating. I think what happens a lot in our industry, and I'd be curious if it happens in society as general, is we hear certain values and we're like, yeah, I like that. That's what I am, right? And two that I hear all the time that people say they are humble and humility. And I'm like, do you even know what that means, right? Like, because those are some big words. I mean, being humble and showing humility, like that takes a lot of work. And it's, and so a lot of these values, I think, sound good to a lot of people. And we just kind of hang our hat on that. Like, that's what I want to, that's a value to me because I like the way it sounds, what it is. But am I living it? So it's one thing to know what your values are. And then it's another thing to actually live out those values. So one thing I talked about there, in Virginia, and I just pondering this value stuff, and I think a good exercise and a hard exercise for people to do, especially in our industry, is write down what your values are, what you think they are, and then go out to 5 people, colleagues, close friends, maybe somebody you barely know that just is going to judge you like a book, judge the book by its cover, like somebody like that. And ask these people, hey, here's the paper. Can you write down what you think my 5 values are? And you're pretty much asking them, like, what's my personality from your eyes? And then compare them, right? Compare your list, what you wrote, to what people think about you. And are they the same? Because I would guarantee that most would be different. Because we have this general idea of who we are and what we think we are and what we think these values mean to us, which is okay. But in reality, it might not mean the same to somebody next to you. So I think it'd be very interesting and a big exercise to really look at, okay, here are my values. What do people think my values are? And are they the same? And if they're not, what am I going to do to build on those to ensure that I have those values that are important to me? So I think it's just this constant evolution, and it's about growing your community of people and, collaborating together and people you could be close with and weak with and vulnerable with to really dig deep to figure out what your values are and then how to live that way. And I think that's where we fall apart, right? That's where everything just falls apart is, yeah, I'm a hard worker. I'm respected. I'm loyal. I could tell you the list that most firefighters are going to say, and it's across the board. And it's like I said, are we really those things? And we don't have to fit in this box. I was just talking to someone about this. Like, I feel in the fire service, if you don't fit inside this box with these traits, then we're going to, maybe it's just more what I'm used to in environments that I've been a part of. If you don't fit in this box with these traits and you come from this background, then you're not a good firefighter. And that's that, and we're like so far away from values. And so I think it's important to really look at your individual values, and they don't have to be those hot terms that we see in the fire service. Like, it could be so much more. Like, family could be a value, and God can be a value, and nature can be a value. And yes, we're not using the keywords that we always hear at every class on leadership and stuff when we talk values. It's way different, but those are a lot more real. And when we talk about authenticity and being your authentic self, it's really knowing what those values are to you and then what people think of you. And, having that discussion is not an easy discussion. You're asking people to call you out, right? And I think that's where real growth happens. So I love talking about this stuff, but actually doing it and going out, that's where the challenge is. And to our listeners and people out there, are you willing to go put yourself out there and hear what people actually think about you and think and see if they think that your values are what you think they are? Because I would bet that there's going to be some differences that are going to shock you, So yeah, I'm a little long-winded, but this is stuff that, I could talk about it for a long time, and it's a lot of work. And you want to be humbled and show some humility, go figure out what your values are. Like, really figure those out and ask people around you what they think, and don't get defensive when you hear their responses. That is, a good place to start if you want to be humble and show some humility. But that's a good place to start anyways. That's what you have to do, especially the older we get. We get more stuck in our ways, and get this idea of what things should be like, or hear a word and that's cool and I want to be that. And it's like, no, that's not how it works. Ask the old salty guy in your fire department, or the newest probationary firefighter, what they think of you and what your values are, because they're going to be different. But that's the excitement part of growth, and learning your values and growing is really what it's all about.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head about the authenticity part. Is it's definitely, the not just what you feel, but how other people see you. And are you really living those values? And do people see that? Because you're right. You can say they're this or that, but you have to be trying to live those as well. Even if they're a goal of yours, you have to be working towards that. And how do people see you? And a couple people in our classes mentioned humility and humble. And there was somebody in particular in one of our classes that I work with that did say humility. And I 100% know that that's because of an experience he lived through. And yes, and he was spot on that value for himself. So I'm glad he was bold and brave and said that in our class, because humility for him, he had to walk that in a tough situation at work. And I don't think that was probably a value of his before that experience, but afterwards, a lot of self-awareness that it was very true.
Yeah, it's crazy how life shapes you, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we get this idea, like I said, we're supposed to fit in this box and be who we are because we're firefighters, right? And we get stuck on these traits, and that's who I am, and that's who I'm always going to be, right? And we're not going to let life affect any of those, when the real answer to that is like, okay, BS, right? Like, life is going to affect those, and it is going to change as you grow older and mature more and see things and experience things. And that's okay. We have to learn to grow, and it's okay to lose some values and gain some new ones. And they might not be, fire service terms, but that's so much better, and that becomes your authentic self. And that's what the industry needs. It's not these particular values, this over that. It's you being your authentic self, because when you learn who your authentic self is, and we pull at these values, all those values are good values that we need in our industry. So we don't need everybody to be the same. We want the differences. We want people to just be who they are at their core, and be courageous enough to continue to grow, understand what happens through experiences, and how all that can shift. And like I said, just having a group of people that are in your corner to root you along, to hold your hand, to pave a road for you, to help you through this stuff, because this is extremely hard to do on your own, right? It's been a journey that I've been on a long time on my own, and it's like, you become so misunderstood as well too when you're trying to go through some growth and do some things, especially in our industry. So I think it's just important. This is just an important part of life. If you have families, kids, that's how you set the example on having some real values that you're really working on, that everybody sees you by. So the goal would be, you write your values down, and then you hand it out to everybody, and they write the exact same thing down, from your neighbor who you just wave to occasionally to your best friend. Like, everybody should be writing the same thing down. I have to put this little plug in right now, just because it's like a childhood thing. So, and I asked you before we got on the air, and for all my Illinois people and so many national people, Tom Skilling is just retired of being a weatherman for WGN. And I watched this guy growing up, and you want to talk about passion and humble and showing humility. I mean, this guy is it to a T. You just go watch him and know that it's just cool to see somebody in their element, enjoying what they do. His passion for it is amazing. And like you could see what he values. And I guarantee you, if he wrote down his values, every viewer of his, every friend of his would probably write down the exact same thing. So that's like a big example, a bigger name that, we can relate to or give an example of. And, just see him go, it's like, wow, I can't believe he's been doing this long and he's retiring. Like, who am I going to watch for my weather now? I don't know what I'm going to do. But anyways, just a great example of, values and how to try to align those where everybody sees the same thing.
That's amazing. Like, you wouldn't think of a weather person on TV, viewers knowing their values, but that's somebody that's real. That's a authentic, genuine person. If you know through the TV, or you're pretty sure like, what their values are, I think that's somebody living it, like, living in their realness and their authentic self.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
pretty
If I
cool.
show you some clips, you would be like, "Yep, totally. I see it." Right? Like he is just that. Like you could tell he's that good of a guy, and just the passion he has for weather is. I wish I had that passion for something. I mean, his passion is just crazy. So the other night, we had tornadoes going through Illinois, and it was like one of his last days retiring. I know I'm doing a plug for him, but it was just like what a way to go out too. If tornadoes in Illinois in February, like Tom Skilly's retiring. This is crazy. All right. Anyways, I digress. Let's get back to values.
That's okay. Yeah, so I always love to look at just a list of core values, because they you can find all kinds of stuff out there, as my husband says, on the interwebs, 'cause, he's a Gen Xer living in a baby boomer's mind.
from Texas, right?
Right, from Texas. So, I go through the list, and there's words I just wouldn't think of, like autonomy, beauty, citizenship, and and then there's a bunch of other words on here that are pretty typical. But like, it's fame is on here. I wouldn't think of fame as a value, but that truly for some people that is the goal. That's their value, is fame. Inner harmony. I love that. Peace, learning, openness, optimism, peace. And when I read peace, I'm like, yes, the older I get, the more I value peace. And in so many different terms, but I love when things are at peace, and poise. Poise is on here too. And the more emotional intelligence work I've tried to do, I really feel like poise is it probably isn't a value I've lived in, but it's a goal. I would rather have more poise than I've had in the past, and how I respond in certain situations and what sets me off or ticks me off. So I just love to keep looking at those words and thinking about how they make me feel, and thinking about how I could live through them, and help others with theirs. And I love to talk about values.
Yeah, yeah. It's the very core of your being, and it's your guiding light too. Like, if you're not doing what you value, then, it's time to do some self-reflection and look in that mirror and figure it out, and this is where it all starts. And, for so many in our industry, and not even in our industry, we just look at how our values get skewed through childhood, through the experiences that happen to us. And we get this idea of what we're supposed to be. And we have this idea of what we're supposed to be like. And then we start valuing this stuff that really is no reflection of who we are at our core. And it's just a way that we've learned to live a life. And there's just so much more to life than that way of living. And I think we see a lot of brokenness in our world. We see a lot of brokenness in our industry that is just afraid to talk about it. And it's you can have that empathy and compassion for people, but at the same token, a lot of people are just jerks, right? And I think there's a lot of meanness in our industry still, and a lot of just, for lack of better words, old school ways of talking and being. And we just have not progressed out of that. And I think that has a lot to do with values. So, personal values of where you're at, where other people are at, and then giving people that room to really understand what they are. And if they're not fitting in your pretty little box, that's fine. How do we benefit from those values of each individual within our organization? So I think it's just a great conversation to have for you as a person individually, but then on an organizational level, understanding what everybody's values are, how to get them to understand their values, and what to do to allow them to grow so they can really understand and grow into what they value most, right? That should be our goal.
Yeah, and it makes me think of so many things, but I think unfortunately, and the fire service is probably not unique in this, is we promote people based on certain skills and abilities. So a lot of times it's based on their ability on a fire ground, their ability on an emergency scene, which is important. It's really darn important, right? But not everybody's meant to be a leader of people and personnel. People are really good on fire grounds and sometimes not necessarily great at the leadership stuff. And so I think it's teachable. It's definitely teachable. And I think people can work to make it better. I don't think everyone can be a leader, and I don't think it ends up working for everyone, but I think it's a good place to start. I'm trying to be diplomatic here. You're laughing. I can see you laughing at me.
Oh no, I'm going to challenge you when you're done.
Okay. Um, so so this is a good place to start because if you're going to have tough conversations with people, which I think a good leader is always is courageous. They have the courage to say hard stuff. They have courage to set hard good expectations, hard expectations, whatever, however you want to say it. So if you are willing to help someone set values and understand someone's values, you're willing to get to know someone on a different level, and then you're courageous enough to have conversations with people, I, I I think it makes a huge difference. I think that's what all of this that we talk about boils down to, setting performance standards and expectations, but you can't do that and hold people to it without doing some of this work first.
Right, because then you just come off fake, right? And then if you're coming off fake and you're not authentic, people are going to see right through that.
Well, yeah, and you come off. I mean, sometimes you come across as a jerk.
Right, right,
Like, you don't know me. How are you? You're coming in here saying, "Do this, do this, do this." And it's like, well, did you realize like
right.
what just happened? Whatever. So it's yeah.
Yeah.
So what's the
So
challenge?
my challenge, and this might be a whole nother episode because this is a topic that I'm like I grew from, right? I used to think,
Mhm.
are you born a leader? Can anybody be a leader? And I was like, well, yeah, you're born a leader, and no, not everybody can be a leader. I don't think I think everybody can though. And I think it does come back to values and you being your authentic self. And my example is my wife, okay? You cannot put her on a fire ground and lead a scene. Absolutely not, right? You can't put her in a management role to do a personal evaluation and give recommendations and an improvement action plan. All you no, not gonna go well, right? She cannot do that. But she's a photographer, and when she goes out to her and shoots, and she does like she wants authentic photography, like not staged. She wants authentic expression, but she's got to get that out of the kids and the adult clients and so forth. And she's leading that. So in that scenario, in that environment, she is a leader. And essentially that's what people pay her for, is that leadership during that, to get those expressions and that kind of stuff. And she excels there. Now you put me in that environment, absolutely not. Like I don't know what to do. Like, so I think when we look at leadership and will people follow you, right? And so I look at my wife, she's a photographer, she goes out there, will people follow her command out there? Yes. So by definition, she's a leader. But it goes back to finding out what her values were and finding something that she thoroughly enjoyed doing and gets to express herself in an artistic way, use her creativity, right? So artistic, creative, some of her values, and look at what she's able to do, and she's able to lead that. So I do now, I think anybody can be a leader as long as we find out what their truest values are. Are they their authentic selves? And then get them to do that work. And then you can see them lead.
Yeah, I definitely didn't think of it that way. I was thinking of it pretty small brained in the, in our industry
Yeah.
or, in a typical workplace environment,
Right.
leading, motivating, discipline, all that stuff. That the traditional sense. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and that's the way I always thought. And then I was like, well, look at my wife, and we would not, I would most people would not look at my wife and call her a leader, but she in her element, she calls it her flow, right? Where she's in her flow, where she's taking pictures and she just the world, everything is right with the world, right? Stars are aligned. I'm good. I'm where I'm supposed to be. She's an absolute leader there, and it's cool to see and witness someone. It's again like Tom Skilling doing the weather, and it's my wife doing photography, and it's all these things. But what's your journey to figure that out where all is right with the world, stars are aligned, you're your truest self, everybody sees it around you. That's what values are, and that's what values do for you. It gives you that leadership ability, it gives you that authenticity.
Yeah, and I think it also correlates to fire service leaders trying on a leadership style that is not them. They're not in their flow. They're not in their element, and it doesn't come across or feel natural. And usually, people see right through that and it's not effective. People won't follow you when you're trying that out. So I think it's in both ways that if you're trying to or you have not figured out your style, because like for me, in my story talking about how I like to treat people and how I thought I wanted to manage and motivate people was through a lot of grace and through a lot of empathy. And I always approach situations with probably more empathy than I should have. Like, okay, well, I always knew there was something else behind whatever decision they made or whatever behavior had happened. And I thought that was soft and feminine. And I kept thinking, I'm in this male career. And this was not anything anyone had done to me to make me feel that way. This was Carrie's own brain coming up with this stuff that it's too soft, it's too feminine in this male world. I got to be tough and hard and say hard things. And yes, but it made it easier for me to say the hard things because I'd done all this soft work first. And once I stepped into that and realized that was my style, then I'm in my flow. Like if Nikki says she's in her flow, then I'm in my flow and it feels right because then I can have these hard conversations and eventually get to hopefully behavior changes that I want in people because I've done all this other soft stuff first.
Yeah, and a great example, and I think that shows that the stuff that we talk about, it's might sound simple as on the surface, right? What we're saying, just hey, go figure out your values, go look at a list, pick some out that you like, and poof, there you're at. But there's so much work that goes on underneath all that, and it's like, are you willing to take that journey? Right. So are you willing to figure out what your values are? And through that process, you're going to ask other people what they think your values are and not get defensive. And then you're going to figure out what those are. Um, and are those strengths or weaknesses of yours? Because it's okay to have a value that's a weakness, right? I think peace is one of those that I absolutely agree with. And it's like, how do you come to, right? Every day can just be like full of peace, right? But it's a constant work. Like we still can value that. How do I work towards it? And then taking that journey to actually become those things that you value and having the people in your corner to bring you along. And that's like the real journey of growth and progress and where we want everybody to be, listening to us and what we talk about and how to get there. That's really the goal. And I think in turn, this all makes you better at our job. And for the things that we see and the things that we deal with, to be able to ground in yourself and understand who you are, I think is so important to our job. And because our job is so different than anybody else out there. We sleep at our job, and even if you're slow, that affects you. So poor sleep patterns, the things that we see, the environments that we work in, there's a lot of challenges that come forward. So having strong understanding of who you are and living that, walking the walk, talking the talk, all of it is so important to our emotional well-being.
Yeah. And it really does cross over onto the fire ground because all of this sets you up for better communication. So if I know what you need on a values level and I know how to communicate things to you and you know how to communicate with me, when we show up on a fire scene, I can read your body language. I can give you a lot of indirect communication, and I can just I can think of scenes that I've pulled up on with a crew. My first crew at Station 5, we knew each other so well, and we could pull up and just go to work. And we had done all this work at the firehouse, a lot of training too, obviously, but a lot of that was based on knowing each other so well, knowing our strengths, knowing our weaknesses, but communication styles, and it just worked. It just works. And once you do all this hard work and your confidence and your decision making abilities, it just changes the game. At least it did for me.
Yeah, I just wish, my whole hope is that everybody wants to take the journey, but I know the reality of it. I knew what it took for me to take that journey. And it's, again, what we talk about is not easy stuff, and most people don't want to go there and have these conversations and be vulnerable and really dig deep into those values. They're just going to stick to the hot terms that are, in your leadership 101 class on values. And that's who I am. I'm honor, loyalty, and blah, blah, blah. And the list can go on. But I challenge all those listening and out there to really take that journey and figure out what it is that you truly value, because it's so important to who you are and makes you better at every aspect of your life. As we wrap up another episode, this has been Kyle
And Carrie
from the Heat of Command podcast.
Thank you, as always, for listening. Please make sure to follow and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And as always, we love the feedback. Keep it coming.
See you next time.